Hello, and welcome back to another chapter of Heroes and Hermits by Algonaver on AO3. Chapter 6. The streets of Japan were not very welcoming, concluded Grian. His eyes struggled to stay open, and it was difficult to walk. He was clean after his bath on the beach, but his clothes still reeked of garbage and sweat. And now buildings all around him seemed identical, looming over him with their tall shadows and gray colors. Everyone around him has been freaking out about the night skip no matter where he went. Graham passed by a cafe at some point, in his wandering, where he stole a couple of cupcakes. News playing on the radio inside told him that the whole world was in a similar state, apparently. This has left Grian shaken and terrified. He quickly ran as far from the cafe as his legs could carry him, until his heart would stop trying to jump out. What has he done? Now they were definitely on his tail. They'll catch him, and lock him up, and bind his wings. The news will spread quickly, and Green could only hope there truly was no admin here to punish him, although there could still be plenty of others who would want him in their hands. It was so stupid of him to try and use commands on his own. They were easily traceable and noticeable, especially the time change one he performed. Green never finished his training. He had no idea how to erase signs of his code manipulations. If only someone more competent in it was with him, like Zuma, or Doc, or Cub. Just someone who could protect him. Were they okay? Was Mumbo okay? Are they back home or here? Green used his sleeve to wipe away tears that were starting to build up. He had to lean on the cold wall while doing so. His vision was blurry and shaky, the eyes tired and too scared to see the world around. Without full realization of his current reality, Green never felt a new presence beside him. He never felt his body being violently tackled on the ground and pinned down. His eyes only saw glimpses of what was unfolding through the cracks in his skin. With his eyes closed, he still saw a masked person towering over him. Their lips were moving, but Green heard only his own heart and strained breaths. All of his eyes were now hurting, strained in his exhaustion. There were more people talking. He could feel them around, their footsteps loud and clear to him who was laying on the ground. Green winced when a boot was pressed against his chest, squishing his wings against the ground. Though they were not here, Green could still feel them as clearly. Then he felt his blood running cold, not from the assault he barely felt or his uncomfortable position. His eyes snapped open all at once, and he rushed forward. While his attackers were dazed, Green hurried to run past them, because whatever he saw in the passage behind him was much more vicious or hungry than a human could ever be. Still disorientated and panicked, Green dived behind a ventilation tube and pressed his mouth shut. Otherwise, it was threatening to let out the cupcakes he ate earlier. Sounds of what was unfolding on the other side of the pipe became distant as Green focused on regulating his breath. He was so focused, in fact, that his eyes were all wide open, never saw the man coming to his back. It was a second later when he recognized the itching of being watched. It was a good 20 seconds later when he recognized the man. With the sun behind his head, Etho looked like an angel in that moment, a savior, a feather of hope. Green was the happiest he's ever been in this world. I heard some weird chirping and thought it was strange to hear a bird that's not a pigeon. You are not a pigeon, right? Said Etho and sat down in front of Green. I'm not. Green leaned into him and pressing his head against Etho's chest. What happened? Etho, who was not very fond of hugs, or any physical contact in general, but he did make an exception for his friends. Maybe not for the scouts cuddling, but otherwise he could take a few minutes to comfort someone. And Green seemed to be in a dire need of comfort after being thrown into this world. Etho had guessed that Green hadn't met anyone before him, well, except those nasty local thugs who tried to rob him or something. Etho did not stop to ask about their specific goal. All he cared about was Green's safety. He was injured and clearly dazed, concluded Etho after looking at the friend in his arms. There wasn't much that could be done to help him out here. Etho had to take him to the hideout, which meant somehow carrying him through the city because Etho doubted Green was in condition to walk on his own with how horribly he was shivering and whimpering. Perhaps it was a fever, but Etho hadn't known Green for long enough to remember his normal body temperature. For now, all he could do was pick Green up so he wouldn't have to sit on the cold concrete floor. With his arms full of shivering avian, Etho started to think about ways of getting out of here. "Stop right there!" Etho was too late to notice actually rather loud flaps sounding close to their location, so he had to stay in place and observe as a nether-winged person dropped down a few meters away. "I've been searching for that guy all day long, you know. Can't have some weirdo stealing him away. Now I must." He paused, looking behind Etho. If it was a trick to make Etho turn away, it would not work. How silly. "Holy shit! Listen," the guy continued, his voice taking on a more forceful, less energetic tone. "Were you the one who did this to those people?" Crap, thought Etho. Why didn't the bodies disappear? Do they not respawn? Then they would have vanished anyways. To the man in front of him, Etho replied, "Well, yeah, they wanted to kill my friend, so I made the first move. And it would be a smart move on your part to step away now, if you do not wish to share their fate." "Chill out, man. I'm Hawks, and the friend you're holding is Green, who ran away from the hospital and resisted being apprehended by pro-heroes. I suggest we deal with this peacefully. Green is seriously injured and exhausted, and in need of medical treatment. You have just eviscerated at least 4 people, and admitted that, so can't have you walking away too." Hawks was definitely looking for a fight, no matter what words were coming out of his mouth, because he was slowly stepping closer to them. It did not matter to Etho if it was 4 or 5 corpses in the end. He only cared about getting back. The timer he had set up on his comm was soon about to run out. He had to come back before it would do so. He was running late anyway, with meeting Green and now this guy testing his patience. Etho had no doubts about winning this fight if it would start, so he tried to buy himself some time. "How am I going to trust you? I've been there before. Some good guys show up about to save the day with sweet promises and lies. If Green was running away from you, I have no proof of you actually wanting to help." As he said it, Etho slightly shifted Green in his arms so that one of his wings would drop down to cover Etho's lower half. Green was fully passed out at this point. No help would come from him, for sure, so at least he could serve as a shield. Etho was acutely aware of another person crawling on the rooftops above them, spying, lining up for a drop on them. While Hawks was answering him, Etho slid his hand to Green's communicator and turned it on. Feathers were enough to fully cover his actions. He could not look away from Hawks though, so orienting in the menu had to be done solely on muscle memory. There was the one little theory Etho had in the back of his mind for some time now, and this was quite the opportunity to prove it correct or false. His finger brushed over a button on a side of the comm. Not every model had it, and Etho smiled at this behind his mask. Hawks was coming closer now, his heartbeat betraying his calm facade. Etho was not like him. He had nothing to fear. In this fight, he was on top, despite there being someone above his head, ready to strike. Ether was calm, Hawks was not. It was simple. Blind typing was not an easy task. His first attempt failed, com vibrating slightly to indicate incorrect command being put in. Etho needed more time. With two enemies ready to attack and Green asleep in his grip, there weren't that many options. Etho could take this to the skies, but he was nowhere fast or agile enough to fly away without a fight. Carrying Green without injuring him further that way was hard. He could finish them off before leaving. In that case, there was no guarantee that one of them wouldn't take Green and call for backup. Not enough was known about the enemy to risk that. He had nothing to distract them or protect himself. He was shit at hypnosis and seduction. All he had left was hope that the stupid communicator would work. Slowly bending down, Etho placed Green on the ground with his back up. This made Hawks freeze and look at Etho with particular intent in his eyes. His next move was laughably easy to predict. Etho dodged all the projectiles being sent his way from above and front, clawing the wall with such blinding speed that whoever was sitting up there was pushed aside and fell onto the roof. Etho heard Hawks touching Green and wasted no time bringing up Green's comm he had taken earlier. He had a couple of seconds before the person on the roof would stand up, and it was enough for Etho to start typing in the command. A surprise shout was a confirmation that this time he was successful. Green should now be safe in the hideout. As Etho was ready to use the next command, he was tackled, and his hands were now pressed down by his side. Figure clothed in dark outfit brought out a pair of handcuffs. But Etho was not about to give up. Pushing himself on one side, Etho rolled over, pulled the attacker with him. No amount of resistance from their side was enough to stop Etho from moving. One of his hands managed to slip free, and he used this opportunity to thrust it at the enemy's throat, catching them in his grip. Etho pulled himself up and used the momentum from the movement to throw the enemy aside. Far enough to get some distance, not far enough to let them fall off from the roof. But that did not give him time to continue typing. Now Hawks was the one attacking him. His arms and legs were pinned by loose flying feathers, and Hawks tried to ground him again. Etho had other plans. Twisting around, he overpowered the pull of the feathers, and used the speed they gave him to jump farther than usual. It allowed him to clear the gap between buildings and land on a ventilation exit. Jumping down, Etho let out his claws on both hands, and ready for another attack. He could hear Hawks flying towards him. Etho was concentrated, calculating the distance between them, quickly estimating possible outcomes. He needed to get back now. No time for fighting. Leaping up and turning in the air as Hawks was preparing to launch more feathers, he was up in the air. Etho took it as an advantage by placing himself higher than the enemy. Etho extended his arm and let his claws violently sink into the soft coverings of a wing, dragging his sharp claws through them to tear up and let the blood out. His fingers curled, claws doing the same. Sheer force behind his arm's muscles and gravity pull disrupted Hawk's flight way before his claws could sink in. As they did so, it forced an alarmed cry out of the man. Etho pulled his arm away as Hawks flopped in the air and fell. The other person was sitting still down. Etho could feel their slow pulse all the way from here. Well, he might have squeezed them a bit too much. That happened with him sometimes, when he got carried away. Typing back to Etho was fast to finish putting in the command. With the last press of a button, he vanished, leaving his attackers to live. Luck was smiling upon them that day. Appearing in the dark of the base, Etho saw Green down on the floor near the bed. The guy was looking rough. No use in denying that. Picking him up was easy. Carrying him through the room and into the lit part of the base was not as easy. His wings were dangling, and Etho constantly feared tripping on them and falling. Didn't Green have them hidden when Etho first saw him? They must have appeared when Green lost control of himself. Etho left him in a corner to go fetch some medicine he managed to steal during his stay in this world. He briefly turned around to look at the bed, and the one who was occupying it. Could he trust Green to support him with the plan he had in mind? Would Green look at them laying here motionless and reject Etho's plan? He was so close to bringing them back. Perhaps Green would help him without knowing everything. Just on basis of their common history and goals, they both needed to get back to Hermitcraft. No matter how much they tried to blend in, no matter how much Etho's curiosity was pushing him to explore this new world, they did not belong here. Sitting here now on the edge of the bed, looking at Green curled up on the floor in the opposite corner, Etho felt the sharp difference between being out there in the world and sitting here in the familiar warmth. Here he felt safe and peaceful, which was weird to him, considering just a few minutes ago he was being chased by enemies after killing for real for the first time in years. He should have been more concerned about this aura of home and safe that was overpowering all of his other senses. On that bed he was sitting on it was the strongest because he was so close to its source. He finished searching in the medical kit he brought here from the kitchen. Kitchen was a loose term, but that was where he kept the fridge and some resources. Taking out bandages and antiseptics, he went to care for Green's wounds. After taking off the signature red sweater and cleaning some junk away from Green's body, it was time to bandage some cuts on his arms and an open wound on his wing. He was being watched, Etho realized, though looking around revealed it was only Green, whose many eyes started to blink in confusion after being under the sweater for so long. Etho had to turn around. It was unsettling. He knew little of Green's past, but it was polite not to dig in someone else's life. A few minutes had passed before he had gone back to work. The eyes were closed now, and Green was no longer shaking like a leaf. Evil will think of it positively. Green must have recognized him and was now sleeping calmly, knowing he was not alone. His alarm went off, the one he set up on a timer. He was finished with Green's wounds already anyway, so he calmly finished it by wrapping his friend in some heavy blankets. The bed was too narrow to fit the two people. After being done with that business, Etho turned around and walked up to the bed. He knelt in front of it and grasped the ungloved hand closest to him. It was horribly cold for someone who was supposed to be alive. Etho's own hands were ice cold, but he was unused to others being cold like him. He lifted it up to his lips and tenderly bit down. The energy he collected from those who have fallen was nowhere enough to restore the energy that was spent to protect the Hermits. No use in trying to guess how many people were transported into this world in the process. All that Etho could do was try and restore as much of the power as he could. Gently, as softly as he could, Etho applied his energy to let it flow freely through him and into another body. Draining flow was leaving him longing for more, not only for himself, but for his terribly cold, unconscious friend. Before his time as a hermit, this longing was all-encompassing, all-consuming veil over his life. Etho only looked upon that part of his life with disgust of his former self and hoped that he grew past this. Self-control and years of practiced restraint must help him through these tough times while he was forced to rely on his powers in order to save his friends. With Green being here, it will allow Etho to expand his original plans into something grander, something that would give him access to so much more energy than he could ever collect just by hunting alone. Green was a charming guy, master of words, and definitely knew how to attract an audience. This was just what Etho needed. Of course, there were people looking for them after his miscalculated attempt to protect Green. He never meant to kill anyone originally, not after everything he had promised himself. But what was done was done. There was no turning back. Etho didn't know this server was a hardcore one, though this revelation did not help in his struggle in the slightest. He had to be overly cautious with other hermits and find them quickly before any of them can perish. Knowing them, some individuals always seemed to be competing for the world record in amount of deaths. Etho hummed at the vision of Scar his mind brought up. Etho now had to race that death itself. Good thing it was not his first rodeo, not by a long shot. And so the night had passed in relative peace. Etho had carried Green into another room to avoid curious questions. And there were only a couple times when Green woke up to either eat and drink something or to mumble incoherent sentences at confused Etho, who spent the entire night by his side, reading local news on his communicator. He also considered examining Green's device to learn more about it, but decided to ask Green about it later. It would be unfortunate if his tinkering messed it up and left them without a crucial piece of communication. And it eventually turned off anyways, after being away from its registered owner for too long. Etho returned it to its rightful place and went back to check on the other hermit, who was unconscious in another room. That was when Green woke up. After that, it wasn't long before Etho came back, and they properly caught up. Green remembered that Etho was not the touchy type, but at this point Green was so touch-starved he was ready to beg for a hug. It did not come to this, thankfully, and Etho was very willing to hug him, although it was a rather chilly hug, just like that one time Green hugged Iskall in the iceberg biome and got cold burn from his friend's prosthetics. Etho was like that, a walking piece of ice. Green was ready to get on board with pretty much any plan Etho had come up with, even before hearing any details. This place was not as nice as it first seemed like, and Green wanted to go back home with others, even if it will involve singing on stage in a tight dress in front of a crowd. And that is the end of Chapter 6.